The moon shone coldly over the camp of the Assyrians, a vast sea of war tents stretching across the hills surrounding Jerusalem. Campfires flickered like distant stars fallen to earth. The air, though still, hummed with the anticipation of bloodshed. Within each tent rested a warrior of the mightiest empire. The world had yet known 185,000 seasoned soldiers whose swords had carved paths of conquest from the Tigris to the Nile. At the center of this military leviathan stood a man whose very name inspired terror king Sennacherib of Assyria. A tactician of unmatched cruelty and brilliance, Sennacherib had reduced countless cities to dust and exiled their peoples. His empire, built on fear and violence, had become a monstrous testament to human ambition, unrestrained by conscience. Now his gaze turned to Jerusalem, the final bastion of defiance in a region already subdued. Inside the city walls, King Hezekiah of Judah stood not with weapons, but with prayer. Young but wise beyond his years, Hezekiah was no ordinary monarch. His rule had begun with a spiritual reformation. Idols were cast down, the temple purified, worship restored. His people had turned back to the God of their fathers. Yet now, that faith faced its ultimate test. Assyrian messengers had already breached the silence of the valley. Rabshakeh, the most eloquent and vicious of them, stood outside the aqueduct and raised his voice in fluent Hebrew. He mocked the city's faith, equating the God of Israel with the powerless idols of vanquished lands. His words slithered into the ears of Jerusalem's citizens like serpents' words, crafted to erode trust and sow despair. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you," he shouted. "No god of any nation has saved its land from the king of Assyria. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Did they deliver Samaria?" Within the city, silence reigned. Not a word was spoken in reply. Hezekiah had commanded it, "Do not answer him." And so, while the enemy taunted, Jerusalem listened with bated breath, clinging to a fragile hope. Hezekiah tore his royal robes and donned sackcloth, not out of defeat, but in humble defiance. He entered the temple and laid the enemy's threats before the Lord. His prayer was not just for survival, but for the vindication of God's name. "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. Deliver us, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God." Far away, the prophet Isaiah received the word of the Lord. His message struck like lightning through the darkness. "He will not enter this city. He will not shoot an arrow here. By the way he came, he will return." And still, as dusk gave way to night, the ground trembled under the weight of Sennacherib's forces. The city of God stood surrounded, its fate hanging not on the strength of its walls, but on the faith of its king. What happened next would not only rewrite the annals of history, but become a beacon of faith for all generations. The darkest night had come, but in the shadows, a divine hand was already at work. The stillness of the night in Jerusalem was not the stillness of peace, but the pause before a storm. From the rooftops and walls, watchmen strained their eyes into the darkness. They could see the embers of the Assyrian campfires dotting the horizon, a terrifying constellation that spelled doom. Yet within the city, hearts were turning to an ancient promise. Isaiah, the prophet of the Lord, had spoken again. His words carried through the royal courts like fire in dry grass. "Thus says the Lord, he shall not come into this city, not an arrow will fly over these walls." Though Isaiah's voice was calm, his message was like thunder. It reverberated through the hearts of all who heard, and among the people a spark of hope was kindled. Some wept, others fell to their knees. In a city prepared for battle, it was prayer that now filled the air. Meanwhile, King Hezekiah did not sleep. His chamber was dimly lit by oil lamps, his face drawn not by fear but deep contemplation. Around him lay the scrolls of the law, and beside them the letter from Sennacherib. The arrogant threats, still etched in fresh ink, glared back at him like a challenge hurled at heaven. Outside, in the narrow streets of Jerusalem, stories from old were whispered like sacred mantras. "Do you remember Egypt?" one mother asked her son. how the Lord struck them down with plagues, how he parted the sea. Yes, the old tales lived anew, but this was no children's fable. This was the final hour. In the Assyrian camp, Rabshakeh rehearsed his speech again. He had seen the fear in the eyes of Jerusalem's people. Another proclamation at dawn, he thought, and the city would crack like dry clay. Sennacherib slept soundly, confident that his army, unmatched in power, needed only to wait until the city surrendered out of despair. Yet something unseen stirred. Miles above, the sky darkened, though no cloud moved. A stillness more profound than silence swept across the hills. From the heavens, one presence descended, cloaked not in human form but in celestial resolve, the angel of the Lord. The same hand that had closed the sea over Pharaoh's army now hovered over the Assyrian host. But none saw it yet. Inside the temple, incense still rose. The Levites sang quietly of deliverance. Hezekiah stood once more before the altar, lips moving in silence, heart opened like a scroll to be written by the will of God. And God answered. The midnight air over the Assyrian camp was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of iron and sweat. Soldiers murmured in their sleep, their breath slow and rhythmic, unaware of the presence that now moved silently through their ranks. A wind, not stirred by the earth, rustled through the tents, gentle, yet otherworldly. In the center of the camp, near the great tent of Sennacherib, the angel of the Lord moved unseen. There were no trumpets, no clash of steel, only a silence so complete it seemed to consume the very stars. One by one, like candles snuffed by an unseen hand, the breath of life left the warriors of Assyria. Back in Jerusalem, the city remained still. The people, unaware of the judgment unfolding outside their walls, remained in prayer and rest. Mothers clutched their children, elders whispered psalms, and Levites maintained their vigil in the temple. Hezekiah, his body weary but his spirit steadfast, rested in his chamber, unaware that his greatest prayer was even now being answered. As the first light of dawn painted the sky with hues of crimson and gold, a trembling watchman peered over the wall. What he saw caused his knees to buckle. Silence, no movement, no taunts, no marching drums. The once mighty camp of Assyria lay still, deathly still. By mid-morning, brave scouts ventured beyond the city gates. What they discovered sent waves of astonishment and awe through Jerusalem. Row after row of lifeless bodies, 185,000 strong, lay strewn across the battlefield. Weapons untouched, eyes open but sightless, expressions frozen in the final instant before divine justice descended. The cries of mourning, which had filled so many cities Assyria conquered, were now absent. Instead, songs of deliverance rose from Jerusalem. The city had been saved, not by sword or strategy, but by the hand of the Almighty. News reached Sennacherib as he emerged from his tent, confused by the quiet. His generals were gone. His mighty mensolent, horror overcame him. Pride gave way to terror. Without ceremony or dignity, the king fled. Back to Nineveh, where he would later meet a tragic end at the hands of his own sons in the temple of his God. Isaiah's words had come to pass with astonishing accuracy. By the way he came, he shall return, he shall not set foot in this city. The people of Jerusalem, once poised on the brink of despair, now stood in awe of their deliverer. The angel of the Lord had passed through their enemy's camp like a shadow, unseen but unstoppable. And so began the dawn of a new faith, a deeper, unshakable trust in the God who saves not by numbers or might, but by his word alone. Morning sunlight now blanketed Jerusalem with the glow of deliverance. The city that had once braced for destruction now rang with hymns of gratitude. From the temple courts to the narrow alleys, the people sang and wept not for sorrow, but for the overwhelming weight of mercy. No victory cry, no trumpet blast, only the collective voice of a redeemed people lifting their hearts to heaven. Hezekiah walked through the streets, greeted by tear-streaked faces and hands raised in praise. Children ran beside him, shouting psalms they barely understood, their joy unburdened by the fear their parents had carried. The king did not speak much, for the awe of what had happened left words trembling on his lips. He only lifted his hands toward the sky, his silence a powerful testimony. In the temple, the priests prepared a national thanksgiving offering. The altars burned brightly, and the fragrance of incense rose like the prayers of a people reborn. Levites in white linen led a procession of song, recalling the great deeds of the Lord throughout history, now crowned by this unparalleled deliverance. Isaiah stood again before the people. He raised his voice, and Jerusalem listened. "See what the Lord has done," he declared. "He has shattered the pride of the nations. He has defended his city, not for our sake, but for his name and the promise he made to David. Let none say, 'Our strength delivered us,' for it was the hand of God alone." So, Hezekiah later convened his council. Though the threat had passed, the lessons were just beginning. "We must not forget," he told them. "What was preserved here was not just a city, but a covenant. The Lord showed us that in repentance and rest is our salvation, in quietness and trust is our strength." Over the coming days, Jerusalem transformed. Fear gave way to fervor. Those who had doubted now believed with a zeal that stirred the soul. Merchants turned their stalls into stations of praise. Soldiers laid down their weapons at the temple steps. Even the children, once silenced by terror, now sang as prophets. But not all was easy. With victory came the burden of memory. Families walked outside the gates, witnessing the stillness of the Assyrian dead. Some fell to their knees, others lifted their eyes to heaven. The battlefield had become a sacred ground, a testimony carved in silence. From distant lands, rumors of the miracle spread. Traders from Tyre and Sidon, travelers from Egypt and Moab, all spoke of Jerusalem's God, the one who needed no army to save. Among these were foreign scribes, eager to understand, to record, and to question. "What power is this that fights without sword?" they asked. And to each, the people of Jerusalem replied, "Not what, but who." Isaiah inscribed the events in a scroll. He wrote of the king who prayed, the angel who struck, the army that vanished, and the city that endured. He wrote not for that generation alone, but for the ones to come, that they might remember, God is not distant, he is a fortress for the faithful. And so Jerusalem stood not just intact, but awakened. A city that had glimpsed the edge of annihilation, now walked forward in light, guided not by fear, but by faith. Years passed, and though Sennacherib's fate had been sealed, struck down by his own sons in the temple of his God, Jerusalem stood untouched, her walls a silent monument to divine preservation. Yet the miracle of that night was not merely a tale of survival, it was a pivot in the soul of a nation. King Hezekiah, growing older, often returned to the temple in the early morning, when shadows stretched long and the city still slept. There he would kneel, hands weathered by time but heart still lifted by gratitude. The memory of that night, the silence of the battlefield, the lifeless enemy, the breath of God remained vivid. Isaiah continued to speak words of warning and comfort, of exile and return. His scrolls would one day fill the hands of scribes and the hearts of prophets. But for now, they were living words, heard from his own voice, reminding the people of their calling. The children who once trembled behind stone walls had grown into a generation of unshakable faith. They told their own children not only of what happened, but of who their God was, a deliverer, a defender, a king beyond kings. Pilgrims from foreign lands came not only for trade but to ask. They walked the temple courts with reverence, asking, "What God did this?" And the priests would open the scrolls and tell them of the Lord of hosts, the one who answered prayer and honored humility. Jerusalem flourished. The Siloam tunnel continued to deliver water. The temple echoed with music and laughter. The walls, once symbols of desperation, now held stories of hope. Hezekiah eventually rested with his ancestors, and his name was remembered not for the strength of his sword, but for the strength of his spirit. The Chronicles of Judah recorded not only his reforms and constructions, but most of all his trust. As generations passed, the story was told again and again. Not for pride, but for praise. Not to boast, but to believe. In synagogues, families, and festivals, people would pause and recall. In the days of Hezekiah, when the proud Assyrians encamped and all seemed lost, the Lord sent his angel, and by morning, what man could not do, God had done. Even centuries later, when empires rose and fell, the story would echo, still whispered in moments of fear, sung in days of joy. And so the siege did not end with the death of an army. It ended with the birth of a testimony. The siege of faith, as it came to be known, became not just a chapter of history, but a cornerstone of belief. For every generation that faces its own Assyriabe, it in doubt, despair, or darkness, the words of Hezekiah still rise. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you. He will fight for you.